The late September air carried that unmistakable scent of the Ohio River, damp, cool and heavy with the hum of campus life. Marshall University was alive that Friday night in 2004. Music pulsed through open dorm windows, laughter echoed across the quad, and the glow of string lights shimmered against the brick walls of the freshman residence halls. For most students, it was just another start-of-semester party. For Emily Carter, it was her first real taste of college freedom, and the last night anyone would ever see her alive. Emily had arrived at Marshall just 3 weeks earlier, a bright-eyed freshman from Charleston. She was the kind of person people noticed not because she was loud, but because she carried a quiet, genuine warmth. Her roommate, Sarah Dalton, liked to joke that Emily could make friends with a shadow. She studied journalism and dreamed of writing stories that mattered. That evening, she dressed simply: jeans, a blue hoodie, her favorite silver bracelet, the same one her mother had given her for graduation. Around 9, she joined a group heading down to the recreation hall for a dorm mixer. "Come on, Em," Sarah had said, tugging her arm. "You've been reading all week. You need to meet people." Emily smiled. "Just for a bit. I've got an early class tomorrow." The night unfolded like hundreds of college nights before: music, cheap punch, and the electric energy of new beginnings. Emily chatted with classmates, danced for a while, then drifted outside for air. That was the last confirmed sighting. Sometime after midnight, she vanished into the quiet corridors and shadows of the campus. Before we uncover the truth behind this haunting mystery, make sure you subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the untold side of small-town America, where ordinary nights can change everything. When Emily didn't return to her room by morning, Sarah assumed she'd stayed with friends. But by noon, unease began to creep in. Emily wasn't the type to disappear. Her bed remained neatly made, her phone missing from the desk. By evening, panic settled like fog. Calls went unanswered. Her parents, Tom and Linda Carter, were on the road to Huntington by dawn. Campus police began with routine questions. Was she drinking? Did she have a boyfriend? Any reason she'd leave on her own? Sarah could barely speak between tears. No, she wouldn't just go. She's not like that. Officers searched the dorm, the dining hall, the parking lots. Nothing. Word spread quickly through campus. By Monday, posters lined the walls bearing her smiling senior photo, missing. Emily Carter, age 18. Last seen outside West Hall, September 24, 2004. Students whispered in hallways, parents called home, and news crews circled the gates. Huntington wasn't a place used to headlines like this. It was a river town built on community, where neighbors waved from porches and doors rarely stayed locked. Suddenly fear seeped into every corner. Detective Claire Donovan, a new recruit with the Huntington Police Department, was assigned to assist the university. She'd seen missing person cases before, but something about Emily's file struck her deeply. The ordinariness of it, the suddenness. "There's always a trace," she told herself as she walked the campus that night, listening to the wind rustle through the sycamore trees. No one just disappears. Yet the trail was already fading. No witnesses beyond midnight. No evidence beyond speculation. Only the echo of a young woman's laughter carried on the cool Appalachian air, fading like the last song of that long September night. The morning after Emily Carter's disappearance, Huntington woke to a silence that felt wrong. News traveled fast in a town like this. The Herald-Dispatch ran the headline by noon: "Marshall freshman missing after dorm party." In coffee shops along 4th Avenue, people spoke her name like a question. "You hear about that girl from Charleston? 18 years old, right?" Terrible thing. The story wrapped around every conversation, lingering in the air like the mist off the Ohio River. Detective Claire Donovan sat at her desk, staring at the missing person report. It was thin, too thin for comfort. No witnesses beyond midnight, no security footage worth keeping, and the few leads they had already felt slippery. Claire had only been on the force a year, still earning her footing among veterans who'd seen more than she could imagine. But something about Emily's case pierced through her inexperience. Maybe it was the photo on the file, a bright smile under the summer sun, hopeful and alive. When she first stepped onto Marshall's campus, The atmosphere felt both heavy and unreal. Students moved in clusters, whispering theories. Some blamed outsiders, others pointed fingers at classmates. A group of volunteers set up a search near Ritter Park, combing through wooded trails and creek beds. Claire joined them that evening, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. "We'll find her," she told Sarah Dalton, Emily's roommate, who walked beside her. Sarah's eyes were hollow, her voice barely a whisper. She was excited for life here. She had plans. The first few days were chaos. Campus police worked alongside the Huntington PD, but communication broke down early. "We don't need another jurisdictional mess," Captain Holt had warned. But by then, details were slipping through cracks. One student remembered seeing Emily talking to a tall boy in a grey hoodie outside the rec hall. Another swore she left alone. None of it matched. Reporters descended by midweek, parking vans outside the university gates. Parents clung to hope as candlelight vigils filled the quad. Students sang softly under the night sky, clutching photos of Emily. Claire stood at the back of the crowd, the glow of candles reflecting in her eyes. There was something unbearable about watching hope stretch itself thin. At the Carter family's request, the police expanded the search to the Ohio River and nearby rail yards. For days, officers swept through muddy banks, calling her name into the fog. Nothing. No phone, no bag, no trace. Linda Carter approached Claire one morning, clutching a photo in trembling hands. "This was her on move-in day," she said, voice cracking. "She called me every night. She wouldn't just disappear." Claire nodded slowly. "We're not giving up, Mrs. Carter." "I promise." But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. The department was stretched thin, the public restless, and whispers about just another runaway started to circle. Claire hated that phrase. She'd seen how easily a case could fade once people stopped believing. So she worked late, reviewing statements until her eyes blurred. She drew maps, traced paths from the dorms to the parking lots, searching for a pattern. By the end of that first week, Huntington was no longer just a town. It was a stage for unanswered questions. Emily's face hung in every storefront, her smile frozen in time. And in the quiet hours before dawn, Claire sat in her car by the river, notebook open, the sound of water rushing against the rocks. "You're somewhere out there," she murmured, "and I'm going to find you." The first 2 days after Emily Carter's disappearance were a blur of sirens, search grids, and sleepless eyes. The Huntington Police Department turned one of the university's classrooms into a command post. Maps of the campus spread across the tables, red circles marking every possible lead. Detective Claire Donovan barely left her chair, fueled by bad coffee and instinct. She knew the first 48 hours were everything. After that, time stopped being an ally. By dawn on Sunday, the search expanded beyond the dorms. Officers and volunteers combed the wooded area near the student center, then moved toward the Ohio River. The current was low that week, but the mist clung thick over the water, swallowing sound. "Anything unusual, you flag it," Claire instructed the dive team captain. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced. She'd seen hope vanish in cases like this, replaced by quiet resignation. Not this time, she told herself. Inside West Hall, officers went door to door. Students shuffled nervously in pajamas, clutching coffee cups. Most had the same story. They'd seen Emily at the party, but after midnight, everything blurred. "She left around 12, one girl said, twisting her hair around her fingers. "I think she said something about meeting someone outside." Another student added, "She looked fine. Maybe she just went for a walk." But nobody saw her return. Claire took notes, every small detail etched in her mind. At 11 a.m. she met with campus security. "No footage?" she asked. The officer shook his head. "System was down for maintenance that weekend." Claire sighed. Of course it was. It wasn't incompetence, just bad luck, the kind that haunted cases like this. Then a potential break. Around 2 p.m., a groundskeeper reported finding a phone near the West Hall parking lot. It was an older model, pink flip phone, battery removed, screen cracked. Claire's pulse quickened. "Bag it carefully," she said. When the tech team checked the SIM card, it matched Emily's number. But there were no recent messages after 11:58 p.m. Friday, 1 minute before she was last seen. Ryan Lee, one of Emily's classmates and a close friend, arrived at the station that evening. His eyes were red, voice shaking. "She texted me before the party," he said. "Don't let me stay out too late." That was her exact message. "I thought she was just joking." Claire leaned forward. "Did she seem upset about anything lately?" Ryan hesitated. "There was a guy, Mark, I think, engineering major. She said he made her uncomfortable once, but she brushed it off." By Sunday night, the campus felt changed, laughter replaced by the low murmur of worry. Flyers multiplied on bulletin boards, taped over weekend event posters. A student-led search team lit flashlights across the soccer fields, calling her name into the darkness. Claire's captain stopped by her desk just after midnight. "You're running yourself into the ground," he said. She didn't look up. "If she's out there, she's cold, scared. We can't stop now." He paused, then nodded. "Just remember, Claire, not every story ends with an answer." But she refused to believe that. In her gut, she felt Emily was close, not gone, just hidden beneath the noise of speculation and fear. As the clock ticked past the 48th hour, the detective stood outside the dorm, wind carrying the faint chime of a church bell from downtown Huntington. The night was still, too still. Somewhere out there, the truth waited, and Claire had no intention of letting it slip away. By mid-October 2004, the search for Emily Carter had lost its urgency. The posters on campus had begun to curl at the corners, their ink fading from rain and time. Students still paused to glance at her face, but fewer now. The university moved on, midterms, football games, the usual rhythm of life resuming as though the tragedy had been absorbed into the landscape. For Detective Claire Donovan, that silence was unbearable. The initial tips had slowed to a trickle. Every lead that once felt promising now sat buried in thick folders stacked across her desk. She stared at them each night, the fluorescent light above flickering like a heartbeat. "You can't chase ghosts, Donovan," her captain had told her. But Claire wasn't ready to give up. She believed that somewhere between statements and interviews, someone had said too little or too much. One evening, she visited the Carters at their motel on 3rd Avenue. The smell of stale coffee filled the room. Linda Carter sat by the window, hands trembling as she folded the same photograph of Emily over and over. Tom Carter paced slowly, his voice hoarse from weeks of pleading with reporters. "They've stopped calling," he said quietly. "At first there were cameras, volunteers. Now it's just us." Claire's throat tightened. "We're still working every angle," she promised, though the words tasted hollow. Back at the precinct, the caseboard loomed, lines connecting faces, dates and locations, like veins in a dying organism. The evidence was minimal. Emily's phone, her dorm key, and a witness who thought he saw her near the parking lot. Nothing connected cleanly. The rumor mill around campus, however, never stopped. Some whispered she ran away. Others insisted she'd been taken by someone she trusted. Claire heard it all, filtering the noise from what might be truth. She found herself revisiting West Hall late at night, walking the path Emily had taken from the rec hall to the dorm entrance. The autumn wind carried the faint scent of fallen leaves and something metallic, like rain on concrete. "What happened to you here?" she murmured to the dark. She crouched near the spot where the phone had been found, tracing the edge of the pavement with her flashlight beam. No answers, only the sound of crickets and the echo of her own thoughts. Pressure mounted from above. The department faced budget cuts, and missing person cases without movement were first to lose resources. "You've done all you can," Captain Holt said during their weekly briefing. "We can't justify more manpower." Claire clenched her jaw. "She's not a file number," she replied. "She's 18 years old." The captain sighed. "And you're burning out. Take a few days off." She didn't. By November, colder air swept through Huntington, turning the river steel gray. Vigils had stopped, but a single white flower still appeared every week on the steps of West Hall. No one knew who left them. Claire often stood there, coat buttoned to her chin, watching the petals shiver in the wind. Somewhere, someone knew the truth and chose silence. That winter, Emily's parents returned to Charleston, exhausted and heartbroken. The university issued a brief statement, offering condolences and reaffirming their commitment to student safety. It read more like a formality than a promise. Claire clipped it from the newspaper and pinned it beside Emily's photo on her board. "You deserved better," she whispered. Snow began to fall over Huntington, soft and indifferent. The case hadn't closed, but it had frozen. A story half-written, waiting for the page to turn. By the summer of 2005, Emily Carter's disappearance had already become a story people lowered their voices to discuss. Huntington was a small town with a long memory, but even memories fade under the weight of unanswered questions. The case file gathered dust in the police archives, its pages yellowing slowly, like the town's collective hope. Detective Claire Donovan passed the shelf every day, her gaze lingering on the spine labeled Carter, Emily, Missing Person, 2004. She couldn't bring herself to move on, even when everyone else did. Over the next few years, she built her career. Promotions came. New cases replaced old ones, and yet the image of an 18-year-old girl in a blue hoodie never left her mind. Every time Claire drove past Marshall University, she slowed down near West Hall. The dorm had changed its paint color. The grounds looked brighter, but the air still held something unspoken, a quiet ache. In 2007, she attended a memorial organized by a handful of former students. Only a dozen people came. Sarah Dalton, Emily's old roommate, was there too, clutching a candle in both hands. "It's like people forgot she existed," Sarah said softly. Claire shook her head. "Not everyone forgot." Sarah gave a sad smile. "You didn't. That's why it still hurts." The years blended together. New freshmen filled the dorms, new faces walked the campus paths, but Emily's name remained etched in whispers and internet forums. Online communities picked up the story, speculating endlessly. Theories about abduction, mistaken identity, even rumors that she'd started a new life somewhere far away. Claire tried not to read them, but sometimes she did late at night, scrolling through strangers' words as though one might accidentally stumble upon the truth. By 2010, Huntington had changed. Downtown shops had closed, factories along the river stood quieter. Claire had learned to manage disappointment. Experience had hardened her, but the Carter case still carried an unhealed wound. She met with Linda and Tom Carter every anniversary, usually over coffee at a small diner off Hal Greer Boulevard. They spoke less each year, the conversations shorter, the silence heavier. "Do you think she suffered?" Linda once asked, her voice almost breaking. Claire paused, then answered gently, "I don't think she was alone for long." It was the only comfort she could give. Still, the detective refused to let the case die completely. Each winter, when work slowed and the city grew quiet under snow, she revisited old notes, reviewed transcripts, and checked if any new technology might help recover lost data from the university's security drives. Her colleagues teased her for it. "Still chasing ghosts?" one joked. Claire only replied, "Maybe. But ghosts don't rest until the living do." In 2012, a new officer stumbled upon the case file while reorganizing records. "You worked this one?" he asked. Claire nodded, fingers tracing the edge of Emily's photo. "Yeah," she said softly. "And I still do." He frowned. "After all this time?" She looked up at him, eyes steady. Time doesn't make someone any less missing. Every September, Claire visited the small memorial bench near the dorms. The brass plaque read, "In memory of Emily Carter, a light that never dimmed." She'd sit there, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of students echoing down the pathways. Life kept moving forward, but some stories refused to settle. And though the case had grown cold, Claire carried the certainty that one day, maybe one quiet morning, one unexpected lead, something would stir again. By the summer of 2018, the case of Emily Carter had become a name uttered only in fragments, the kind people mentioned when silence fell over conversations. Detective Claire Donovan was no longer the young, restless officer she once had been. The lines on her face carried 15 years of unanswered questions, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. Most days she handled new cases, routine and predictable, Yet every so often she'd glance at the old box marked Carter, Emily, tucked neatly beneath her desk as though it were waiting. It was a hot afternoon in early July when her phone rang. Detective Donovan. This is construction foreman Bill Henley. We're working the new dorm site behind West Hall. Found something you might want to see. His tone was cautious. It's probably nothing, but it's old. When Claire arrived, the air smelled of concrete dust and summer rain. Workers stood in a loose circle near a shallow trench. One of them handed her a small plastic evidence bag. Inside, a cracked student ID card, edges worn, the faded photo unmistakable. Emily Carter, Marshall University. Next to it, half buried in dirt, was a silver bracelet, the same one Emily's mother had described years ago, tiny stars engraved around the band. Claire's pulse kicked hard in her chest. "Get this bagged and tagged," she ordered. That night she reopened the old case file. Pages yellowed with time rustled under her fingertips. The photos, the interviews, the dead ends, all of it surged back. 15 years, she whispered to herself. "You're not done talking, are you?" The next morning she presented the findings to her captain, now a younger man unfamiliar with the case. "We've got physical evidence linking back to a missing person file," she said firmly. "This warrants a full re-examination." He frowned. "Claire, that case is ancient. No fresh leads, no suspect, no budget. You know how this goes." She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "A girl disappeared from a university dorm. We just found her belongings buried yards from the building. If we ignore this, we're complicit." The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, you've got 72 hours to justify reopening it." Back at her desk, Claire began pulling every document she could find. The evidence logs were outdated, half the officers retired or dead. The original evidence box had been moved to storage, its seals brittle. She handled it with care, reverence even. Inside lay the phone, the dorm key, and now the newly recovered bracelet and ID. She stared at them for a long time, the weight of memory pressing on her. That evening, she called Linda Carter. The voice on the other end was softer now, slower with age. "Detective Donovan," Linda said, cautious hope trembling in her tone. "Please tell me you found something." Claire hesitated, then replied, "We did. I can't promise what it means yet, but I think it's time to look again." A silence followed, thick with 15 years of grief. "We never stopped praying," Linda whispered. "Not once." After hanging up, Claire stepped outside into the humid Huntington night. The streetlights cast long golden streaks across the pavement. The air buzzed with the sound of cicadas and distant trains. For the first time in years, the case felt alive again. Not just as a file, but as a pulse. Something had stirred beneath the surface of time, and Claire could feel it. 2 weeks after the discovery behind West Hall, Detective Claire Donovan sat in the dimly lit records room of the Huntington Police Department, surrounded by dusty boxes and the faint hum of old fluorescent lights. The air smelled of paper and time. On her desk lay a faded evidence log from 2004 and a stack of DVDs labeled Marshall University IT, archive servers. Most were marked corrupted or incomplete. To anyone else they were useless relics. But Claire had learned long ago that sometimes the past only needed the right eyes to be seen. She leaned back in her chair and called across the room. "Ethan, how's the recovery going?" The young technician looked up from his laptop, headphones hanging around his neck. "It's slow, but I think I can pull fragments from these old drives. Some surveillance footage, maybe network logs. Crazy that they even kept them." Claire smiled faintly. "Crazy's good. Crazy means hope." Hours passed, and the flicker of screens painted her office in ghostly blue light. The soft clicking of the computer keys was the only sound until Ethan suddenly froze. "Detective, you're going to want to see this." He turned the monitor toward her. A grainy black and white video began to play. Time-stamped September 24, 2004, 11:56 p.m. The feed was shaky, angled toward the rear exit of West Hall. Figures moved in and out of the building, laughter echoing faintly through the distortion. Then at 11:58, a familiar face appeared. Emily Carter. Claire's breath caught. Pause it. Emily stood near the doorway, talking to someone, a tall male figure in a hoodie, his face obscured by shadows. They seemed to argue, subtle gestures sharpening into tension. Then, at midnight exactly, the feed glitched and went black. "Can you enhance it?" Claire asked. Ethan frowned. "I'll try, but this stuff's ancient." "Feels like digging through ghosts." The phrase lingered. Digging through ghosts. That's what it felt like, resurrecting fragments of a vanished life pixel by pixel. Later that night, Claire printed still frames from the footage, pinning them side by side on the board above her desk. The man's outline was faint, but something about his stance nagged at her. She pulled the original witness statements from the first investigation, flipping through names she'd memorized years ago. Students, friends, people from the party. One name stood out again: Mark Brenner. He'd been mentioned briefly, a quiet engineering student who'd helped set up the sound system that night. No one had connected him to Emily directly, until now. She compared the build, the height, the timestamp. Everything fit too neatly to ignore. Still, she forced herself to stay grounded. Evidence, not assumptions. Claire circled the figure in red ink. "You're not a ghost," she whispered. "You're flesh and bone, and you're still out there." The next morning she met with her captain. "We recovered partial surveillance from the night Emily disappeared," she began. He raised an eyebrow. "After 15 years. "Yes," she said, sliding the printed images across the table, "and I think we can identify the last person who saw her alive." He studied the photos for a moment before sighing. "Claire, I'll authorize a follow-up interview, but tread lightly. You're reopening wounds in this community." She nodded. "Some wounds don't heal until they're exposed." As she left the office, the morning light poured through the blinds, casting thin bars of gold across the caseboard. For the first time in years, Emily Carter wasn't just a name in a file. She was moving again, through static, through time, whispering her truth from the pixels of the past. The sun hung low over Huntington when Detective Claire Donovan parked outside a modest house in suburban Ohio. The address had come from a public records search: Mark Brenner, age 39. The name had been buried for years in old files, a ghost of a suspect who never made it past the first round of questioning. But now, after seeing the surveillance footage, Claire knew she had to hear his voice again. She sat in her car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the soft flicker of a television through the living room window. When Mark opened the door, he looked nothing like the nervous college kid from the reports. His hair was shorter, streaked with grey at the temples, his shoulders heavier from years of labor. "Detective Donovan?" he asked, recognition flashing across his eyes. "I remember you." "Then you know why I'm here," she said, her tone steady. He hesitated before stepping aside. "Yeah, I figured this would come around again someday." Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to people who'd learned to live small. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and stale coffee. A framed diploma from Marshall University hung crookedly above the mantel. Claire noticed it, the irony heavy in her chest. She began calmly, "Mark, we've recovered digital evidence from that night. The surveillance outside West Hall. You were there, with Emily Carter." He didn't deny it. Instead, he ran a hand across his jaw and stared at the floor. "I was at the party, yeah, everyone was, but I didn't do anything wrong." "Then why didn't you mention seeing her last?" Claire asked. He glanced toward the window, voice tightening. "Because I knew how it would look. She was upset and I didn't want to make it worse." "Upset about what?" He exhaled slowly, eyes distant. "Someone at the party said something cruel. I found her outside crying. I tried to calm her down, that's all. She wanted to walk back to her dorm, so I left her by the steps." "That's it." Claire studied him carefully. His story flowed too easily, too rehearsed. "The footage shows an argument," she said. "You're gesturing. She backs away. What was it really about?" Mark rubbed his temples. "You're reading too much into old video. We were both stressed, that's all." There was a long silence. Outside, the wind rattled the screen door. Claire leaned forward slightly. "You understand, Mark, this isn't going away. New evidence was found near the old dorm site, items belonging to her. That made him flinch. What kind of items? Her ID, a bracelet. His voice dropped to a whisper. That's impossible. She caught the tremor in his tone, fear, not disbelief. You said you left her by the dorm. Are you certain she went inside? He looked up sharply. Yes. I saw her walk toward the door. But no one else did, Claire countered softly. Not a single witness, not even her roommate. Mark's jaw tightened. You think I hurt her? I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. Claire nodded slowly. Then you won't mind if we go over your original statement line by line? He didn't answer. The ticking clock filled the room. Beneath his calm exterior, she sensed unease, the kind that grows from years of hiding something. As she left, the sky had darkened, heavy with the smell of coming rain. Claire paused by her car, notebook in hand. She'd heard countless liars in her career, but Mark Brenner wasn't lying entirely. He was holding something back, something just beyond reach, and she intended to find it. Detective Claire Donovan sat in her office long after midnight, the low hum of the city pressing through the window. The conversation with Mark Brenner replayed in her head, looping like an old tape she couldn't turn off. Something about his tone, that slight tremor when she mentioned the bracelet, gnawed at her. She stared at the caseboard, its tangle of red lines and fading photos. One face kept drawing her back. Sarah Dalton, Emily Carter's former roommate. Sarah had given several statements in 2004, all consistent, all polite. But she'd vanished from the spotlight soon after graduation, moving to Kentucky, then Ohio. Her testimony had always felt too careful, as if rehearsed. Claire opened her file again, her pen tapping against the paper. Time to ask you again, Sarah, she muttered. 2 days later, she found her. Sarah worked as a nurse in a small clinic outside Lexington, her name still recognizable from the old news clippings. When Claire approached her during her lunch break, Sarah froze mid-step. Detective Donovan, she said, her voice brittle. I wondered when you'd show up again. I'm reopening the investigation, Claire said evenly. We've found new evidence, things that suggest the story from that night wasn't complete. Sarah's eyes darted toward the parking lot. It's been 15 years. Why now? Because truth doesn't expire, Claire replied softly. And I think you've been carrying part of it. They sat in Claire's car, the rain beginning to patter on the windshield. For a while neither spoke. Sarah's hands trembled as she toyed with her lanyard. I told the police everything I knew, she said finally. No, Claire said gently. You told us everything that wouldn't hurt you. That broke something. Sarah's shoulders slumped and she exhaled shakily. I was scared, she whispered. We were kids, everyone was drinking, and the police, they were everywhere. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Claire nodded. Tell me what really happened. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That night, Emily wasn't herself. She was upset after talking to Mark. I saw her outside. She looked angry, like she wanted to leave. I called her name, but she didn't hear me. Then she got into Mark's car. Claire's pulse quickened. You're certain of that? Sarah nodded, wiping her cheeks. Yes. I thought maybe she just needed to clear her head. I went back inside. The next morning, when she didn't come back, I panicked. When the police came, I said I last saw her at the party because I didn't want them blaming me. Claire's voice was calm, but her chest tightened. You had 15 years to say this. I know, Sarah whispered. I couldn't sleep for years. Every time I tried to speak up, I told myself maybe she really ran away, maybe I was wrong. But when I saw her picture in the paper again last week, I knew I couldn't lie anymore. The rain thickened, drumming on the roof like a heartbeat. Claire took a long breath. Sarah, this changes everything. You understand that? Sarah nodded weakly. I don't care what happens to me. I just want her family to know I'm sorry. As Claire drove back toward Huntington that night, the windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm. The truth had cracked open, fragile but undeniable. Emily Carter hadn't disappeared into thin air. She'd left that dorm in Mark Brenner's car. And now at last someone had said it out loud. Detective Claire Donovan spent the next morning buried in paperwork, her office lit only by the grey light filtering through the blinds. Sarah Dalton's confession had shifted the entire landscape of the case, but hearsay wasn't enough. She needed something tangible, something that tied Mark Brenner directly to Emily Carter beyond that night. She combed through old campus reports, requesting access to Marshall University's disciplinary archives. Most of what she received was routine: noise complaints, minor infractions, nothing useful. Then, buried under layers of bureaucratic language, one sealed document caught her attention. It was dated October 2004, 2 weeks after Emily's disappearance. The header read, "Student Conduct Committee, Confidential." Claire frowned. The file referenced an internal hearing involving a Mark J. Brenner and an unnamed female student. The details were redacted, the conclusion vague. Still, the timing was too precise to be coincidence. She called the university's legal office. "This is Detective Donovan, Huntington PD. I need full access to disciplinary files concerning Mark Brenner." The woman on the other end hesitated. "Detective, those records are protected by FERPA. Even after all these years, we can't release them without a court order." Claire exhaled sharply. "A girl vanished. This isn't about academic privacy." "I'm sorry," the woman said, her tone clipped. "The university has nothing further to add." The line went dead. For a moment, Claire sat in silence, anger coiling in her stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd seen institutions bury mistakes, but the realization still burned. She reached for her phone again and called Ethan, the young tech specialist. "Ethan, I need you to pull everything you can on Mark Brenner, archived student emails, disciplinary correspondence, anything tied to that time frame." "That might take some digging," he warned. "Then start digging," she replied, "and don't stop until you hit something solid." Hours passed. The clock on her wall ticked softly, marking time she could feel slipping away. When Ethan finally called back, his voice carried a mix of excitement and disbelief. "You're not going to like this," he said. "I found an email thread between campus security and the dean's office, dated October 2004. They discussed a harassment complaint against Brenner. The victim's name was redacted, but the timestamp matches 2 days before Emily went missing." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "They buried it," she whispered. "They knew." Ethan hesitated. "There's more." The university security logs show that Brenner was called in for questioning by campus police, but the file was marked resolved internally, no disciplinary action. Her hands tightened around the receiver. "Who signed off on that?" "Dean Richard Harlow," Ethan said. "He retired in 2008. Claire stood abruptly, grabbing her coat. "Then I guess I'll be paying him a visit." She found Harlow living in a quiet neighborhood near Barbersville, his once sharp features softened by age. When she introduced herself, he shifted uneasily. "It was a long time ago, Detective," he said. "We handled things differently back then." "You mean you handled them quietly?" she replied coldly. He sighed. "There were pressures, donors, reputation, politics. I was told to make it disappear." Claire's voice dropped. "A girl disappeared, Dean. You made sure no one asked why." As she left his porch, dusk settled over the hills, the sky streaked with red and violet. The truth was beginning to surface piece by piece, no longer buried under signatures and sealed files. But Claire knew this was only the beginning, and the cost of pulling it all into the light could be higher than she imagined. The next morning broke grey and heavy over Huntington, the kind of sky that pressed low enough to feel. Detective Claire Donovan stood on the banks of the Ohio River, watching divers prepare their equipment. The river looked calm, almost deceitful, a mirror that had kept too many secrets. After discovering the buried university report and hearing Sarah's confession, Claire had requested a renewed search in the area surrounding West Hall, focusing on the stretch of water where student rumors once claimed a car had gone over the embankment years ago. 15 years is a long time, said Sergeant Owens, adjusting his wetsuit beside her. Currents change, debris shifts. You sure this isn't a wild chase? Claire's gaze stayed fixed on the water. It's not a chase, she replied quietly. It's a promise. The hum of the boat engine echoed across the river as the divers slipped beneath the surface. The air smelled of wet mud and diesel, and a thin mist rolled over the current. Claire's notebook rested open in her hand, its pages fluttering with the wind, a list of coordinates, notes from old reports, and one underlined word: car. Hours passed in tense silence. Then the radio crackled. "Detective Donovan, we've got something." Her pulse jumped. "Go ahead." Metal structure, mid-sized, about 15 feet down. Looks consistent with an early 2000s compact. Claire's throat tightened. "Mark it and bring it up." The next moments unfolded slowly, unbearably. The crane strained as the divers attached cables, and the water churned dark as the object emerged. A corroded vehicle, its once red paint eaten away by rust. Mud and river weeds clung to the frame. The sight drew a hush from everyone on shore. Claire stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. "Get a VIN number," she ordered, voice steady though her chest felt hollow. A diver wiped grime from the windshield, peering inside. "There's something in here." Claire braced herself. "What kind of something?" He hesitated. "Personal effects." "A backpack. Looks old. And jewelry." Her heart hammered. "Bag everything carefully." When they laid the recovered items on a tarp, Claire's breath caught. The silver bracelet, the same engraved one found near the construction site, had a broken clasp, the missing piece still attached to a thread of fabric. The backpack contained deteriorated notebooks, a faded student ID, and a set of keys labeled West Hall 312. Owens muttered under his breath, "That's our girl." Claire knelt beside the evidence, the world narrowing to the sound of her heartbeat and the rush of water nearby. "No," she whispered. "That's part of her story." "We're not done yet." Later that afternoon, as the car was towed from the river, the lab confirmed the VIN matched a vehicle registered to Mark Brenner in 2004. Claire stared at the report, her hands trembling slightly. Everything pointed toward him. The footage, Sarah's confession, the covered-up complaint, and now this. But one question still burned in her mind. Why the river? As twilight settled, Claire remained by the shore, the air thick with humidity and memory. She thought of Emily's parents, of Linda Carter's trembling voice years ago. She wouldn't just disappear. Now, at last, Claire could answer. Emily hadn't disappeared. Someone had tried to make her vanish. The water lapped gently against the rocks, indifferent, eternal. Beneath its surface, it had guarded the truth for 15 long years. Now the river had finally given it back. The air inside the interrogation room felt thick, as if the walls themselves remembered every truth ever forced from between clenched teeth. Detective Claire Donovan sat across from Mark Brenner, the table between them cold and silent. A copy of the forensic report lay open, vehicle identification confirmed, bracelet fragments matched, and traces of fibers from Emily Carter's dorm hoodie found in the car's interior lining. For 15 years, he had lived freely while her parents carried a grave with no body. Now every piece of evidence pointed straight back to him. Mark's eyes were hollow, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the table. "You already think you know what happened," he muttered. Claire's tone was calm, but her gaze was unrelenting. "I want to hear it from you, Mark. Tell me why her things were in your car. Tell me why you never came forward." He swallowed hard. "I didn't kill her." "No one said you did," Claire replied quietly. "But you know something that's been buried as long as that car." He leaned back, exhaling shakily. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Claire didn't move. She let the silence stretch, the weight of his own words pressing down until he spoke again. She was upset that night, angry about the rumors. Someone told her I'd said things I didn't. I tried to talk to her after the party, clear it up. She didn't want to listen. His voice cracked slightly. She hit me on the shoulder, told me to leave her alone. I panicked. I grabbed her arm so she'd stop walking away, but she pulled harder. She lost her balance. Claire's pen stopped moving. "Go on." "She fell," he whispered. "It was near the lot by the slope. She hit her head when she went down. I remember the sound. It was Wrong. I checked her pulse, but she wasn't breathing. I didn't know what to do. The tremor in his voice deepened. I was drunk, scared. I thought if I called for help, they'd blame me. I put her in the car. I just wanted to think. I drove around for hours until the sun started to rise. He paused, staring at the wall as if replaying it all in real time. When I reached the river, I just froze. I couldn't look at her anymore. I pushed the car down the embankment. It sank fast. I thought it would all disappear. Claire sat in silence, the confession heavy in the air. You had 15 years, she said softly. You watched her family beg for answers while you hid. Mark's shoulders slumped. I told myself it was an accident, that it didn't matter if no one knew. But it never stopped mattering. Her voice hardened slightly. You let an entire town carry your guilt. He nodded, tears beginning to fill his eyes. Every night I saw her face. I thought if I ignored it long enough it would fade, but it never did. Claire closed her notebook. You're under arrest for the concealment of a body and obstruction of justice. The rest will follow. As officers entered to escort him out, Mark whispered something almost too quiet to hear. I'm sorry. When the door closed, Claire stayed seated, her mind spinning. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was the ache of years collapsing into truth. Emily Carter's story finally had an ending, but justice, Claire realized, never truly felt clean. It always left a shadow, and this one would follow her home tonight. The courthouse in Cabell County was crowded on the first day of State of West Virginia versus Mark Brenner. Reporters filled every row, their notebooks poised to catch fragments of justice 15 years overdue. Outside, the wind whipped through the flags, grey clouds swirling like the town's collective unease. Huntington had waited too long for this day, but closure, Claire Donovan knew, was never as simple as a verdict. She sat behind the prosecution, hands folded over her notebook. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked coats. Linda and Tom Carter sat in the front row side by side, their fingers intertwined, not in strength, but in exhaustion. Claire had met their eyes that morning, offering a quiet nod. Linda had whispered, "We just want the truth to mean something." The state presented its case methodically. Photos of the recovered car, the bracelet, and Emily's identification were displayed for the jury. Claire's notes, her reconstruction of the timeline, became the backbone of the prosecution's narrative. Mark Brenner concealed his actions for 15 years, the attorney said firmly. He deprived a family and an entire community of peace. Mark sat motionless at the defense table. His hair was thinner now, his posture smaller. His attorney painted him as remorseful, a man who made a tragic mistake and lived under its weight. He was a frightened 20-year-old, the defense said. He didn't plan to harm Emily Carter. He panicked. That panic destroyed lives, including his own. Claire listened, jaw tight. She knew guilt when she saw it, not the kind the law defined, but the kind that rotted from the inside. Every word Mark spoke during his confession still echoed in her mind. She wondered whether the jury could see the same cowardice hiding behind his lowered eyes. During Linda Carter's testimony, the courtroom fell utterly silent. Her voice trembled but never broke. Every birthday, every Christmas, we set a place for her, she said. We didn't have a body to bury, but we buried our joy. I don't want revenge. I just want him to admit that she mattered. Even the defense attorney bowed his head. When Mark took the stand, his voice was hoarse. I didn't mean for her to die, he said. I was scared. I thought time would make it go away, but it didn't. It never did. The prosecutor leaned forward. And yet you stayed silent for 15 years. Why didn't you turn yourself in? Mark hesitated. Because admitting it out loud would make it real. Claire's stomach twisted. The words were selfish, hollow. They were the same justification she'd heard from men who mistook regret for redemption. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. Rain began to fall outside again, tapping softly against the windows. When they returned, the foreman stood with the verdict slip in hand. So we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter and obstruction of justice. A murmur rippled through the room. Linda reached for Tom's hand, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Mark's expression didn't change, only a faint exhale, like a man finally exhaling the lie he'd lived in. As the bailiff led him away, Claire rose slowly. Justice had been served, though imperfectly. The law could never return what had been lost, but it could draw a line, a quiet declaration that Emily Carter's life still meant something. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the courthouse lights, and the air smelled of wet earth and beginnings. For the first time in 15 years, Huntington breathed again. Spring arrived quietly in Huntington the following year, the dogwoods blooming along the streets near Marshall University. The trial had ended months ago, but its echoes lingered. In classrooms, in small-town conversations, in the way people glanced toward the river when the light hit the water just right. For most, the story had finally found closure. For Detective Claire Donovan, it had found a scar. She walked through the university grounds one morning, the same paths she had walked as a young detective 15 years earlier. Students hurried past, laughing, earbuds in, backpacks slung low. They didn't know the name Emily Carter, not really. The campus had grown and changed, new dorms, new faces, new stories being written. Yet beneath it all the memory remained, quiet but unforgotten. A bronze bench stood under a maple tree outside West Hall, sunlight spilling across the engraved plaque. In memory of Emily Carter, a light that never dimmed. Someone had left fresh tulips beside it. Claire paused, touched the petals gently and smiled. Linda and Tom Carter had returned for the dedication ceremony a month earlier. The turnout had surprised everyone. Hundreds of students, faculty and townspeople gathered, many who hadn't even been alive in 2004. Linda had spoken softly that day, her voice carrying across the courtyard. For years we begged for answers. Now we choose peace. We want this place to remember her not for the way she died, but for the way she lived. Those words had stayed with Claire. She thought about them now as she sat on the bench, notebook in her lap, the air warm and sweet with the smell of cut grass. In all her years on the force, she had learned that justice wasn't an endpoint. It was a slow, uneven road, and sometimes it ended with flowers instead of verdicts. Later that week, she met Ethan, the young tech specialist who had helped her reopen the case, for coffee downtown. The cafe was small, its walls lined with old photographs of Huntington's riverfront. Ethan handed her a newspaper clipping. "They gave you a mention," he said with a grin. The headline read, "Detective Donovan, honored for persistence in 2004 cold case." Claire chuckled. "I didn't do it for a plaque." "I know," Ethan said, "but you gave a family their truth. That matters." She looked out the window at the slow-moving river. "Truth always matters. It just doesn't always come easy." As they talked, the sound of laughter drifted from outside, students passing by, carefree and loud. It made her heart ache in a good way. For so long, Huntington had carried a shadow. Now, it felt lighter. That evening, Claire visited the Carters' house. They had moved back to Huntington, close to the university where Emily's scholarship fund now helped incoming journalism students. Linda greeted her with a warm hug, eyes shining. "We named the first recipient last week," she said proudly. "Her name's Ava. She reminds me so much of Emily." Tom poured them tea and sat beside them, his voice calm. "You know, Detective, for the first time in years we feel like she's home." Claire smiled softly. "She is, and she'll stay here, in every word those students write, in every dream they chase." As night fell over Huntington, the town seemed gentler, quieter, no longer haunted by unanswered questions. The past had been faced, the truth laid bare, and life, fragile, stubborn, beautiful, continued. For the first time in a long while, Claire Donovan let herself breathe freely. The case that had defined her was finally at rest, and so, in a way, was she. 600 words. Part 14. The town moves on, 600 words. Spring came softly to Huntington, the air fragrant with rain and new grass. On Marshall University's campus, the cherry trees bloomed, pale pink petals drifting across the stone walkways like confetti from another lifetime. Students hurried between classes, laughing, unaware of how heavy those same paths had once felt. For them, the story of Emily Carter was history, something their professors mentioned when talking about campus safety reforms. For Detective Claire Donovan, it was still a pulse that hadn't quite faded. She returned to the campus that April morning, her coat folded over one arm, a paper cup of coffee growing cold in her hand. West Hall stood taller than she remembered, its exterior renovated, the old cracks and stains covered in fresh paint. Yet to Claire the building seemed haunted, not by ghosts, but by silence. She crossed the courtyard until she reached the bronze memorial bench under the maple tree, in memory of Emily Carter, a light that never dimmed. Someone had left fresh daffodils there, their bright yellow heads tilted toward the sun. Claire sat down slowly, her eyes tracing the letters of Emily's name. She thought about the trial, the long nights in the department, the endless paperwork that followed justice. It was never glamorous, never perfect. Justice was paperwork and pain and people learning to live with the truth. She remembered Linda and Tom Carter's speech at the memorial dedication 2 months earlier. The crowd had filled the quad, students, alumni, townspeople, even former officers who had worked the original case. Linda's voice had trembled, but her words had been steady. We carried grief for so long, we forgot how to carry hope. Today, we let our daughter's story belong to the light again. Tom had placed his hand over hers, and together they'd smiled, small, fragile, but real. Claire closed her eyes now and let the memory wash over her. A soft wind rustled through the leaves above. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the familiar tension in her chest. The town was healing. Later that day, she met Ethan at a small cafe near the river. The scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the air, and sunlight flickered through the blinds. Ethan grinned as she walked in. "You made the front page again," he said, sliding a folded newspaper across the table. The headline read, "Detective Donovan receives state commendation for solving 2004 cold case." Claire laughed lightly. "Guess I'm officially the department dinosaur now." Ethan shook his head. "You're the reason this town got closure. That's not nothing." She stirred her coffee slowly. Closure's a funny word. I don't think anyone ever really gets it. We just learn to carry what's left. Outside, the Ohio River shimmered under the afternoon sun. Claire watched it for a moment, the water flowing calm and certain, no longer menacing. "For years, I thought that river would always hold its secrets," she said quietly. "Turns out it just needed someone who wouldn't stop asking." That evening, she drove to the Carters' new home near Ritter Park. Linda opened the door before she could knock. "Claire," she said warmly, "you're just in time. Tom's about to show me the first recipient of the scholarship fund." Tom handed her a printed photo, a young journalism student beaming on the campus lawn. "Her name's Ava," he said. "Reminds us of Emily." Claire smiled, feeling something unclench inside her. Then Emily's story is still doing what she always wanted, inspiring others. As night settled over Huntington, the glow from the park lights reflected on the quiet streets. The town had not forgotten. It had simply learned to live again. And in that gentle stillness, Claire finally understood. Some stories don't end. They evolve into hope.